the disarmament of NATO. It's not just the disarmament of NATO from a physical standpoint. NATO has lost all credibility. I mean, NATO lived off of the perception that it was this giant alliance with full of these modern armies with this modern equipment. And those Russians wouldn't dare mess with NATO because NATO had Leopard tanks. NATO had M1 tanks and Challenger tanks. And, NATO had stuff. And it turns out that stuff is garbage. It also turns out that NATO armies are useless. Germany, for instance, has been exposed as literally nothing but a bunch of, schnitzel eating, beer chugging, fat men who can't fight. They can't pass a physical fitness test. They haven't maintained any of their equipment. They are Germany's talking about putting together a 5,000 man brigade in Lithuania to reinforce the 1,500 battalion that they have in there. Except they don't have any tanks. They're like, well, we'll send the brigade, but we don't have, and we can't make tanks. Their industrial capacity has been diminished because of sanctions, because of the whole energy thing. And, they're now paying 3 times as much for energy. Their factories are shutting down. They don't have any, forges working. They're not producing the steel, the aluminum, or anything. So they can't make the tanks they need to build this magical army that they're talking about producing. When was the last time a German soldier actually put 90 pounds on his back, force marched 25 miles, and did a military task at the end under pressure? Never. They just sit there. They're a peacetime army of men who don't want to be there. What I mean by that is they can't get a job anywhere else. The good mechanics aren't in the German army. They're working for Mercedes. They're working for Audi. They're working for somebody else. The physically fit guys are playing sports. They're not doing this. The German army isn't, it's not a patriotic service because the Germans have forgotten what it means to be patriotic. So they have a military of men who aren't good at anything. They're definitely not good at fighting. And the German army has already admitted that there's nothing that can stop the Russians from reaching the Oder River if they wanted to reach the Oder River. The good news for NATO is Russia doesn't want to do any of that. All Russia wants to do is be Russia. And this is the other thing that's happened here, because Russia has redefined itself. I don't know if anybody picked up on, the statements made earlier this year by Putin and by Lavrov about Russia's new foreign policy. And it's hinged on 2 things: the issue of Russian sovereignty and the issue on Russian what's the word I'm looking for? Not sustainability, but self-reliance. So basically, when Russia started the special military operation, their economy was woven in with the West, and Russians still had this inferiority complex about, everything's better in New York, everything's better in Berlin, everything's better in Paris. Larry, you were just in Moscow.
Yeah.
Everything ain't better in all these other cities. Moscow's pretty damn good.
Right.
And Russia's pretty good. I was in the other parts of Russia, in the cities that aren't heralded: Novosibirsk, Irkutsk, Ekaterinburg, Izhevsk, Vodkinsk. They're doing okay too.
Yeah.
Russia's doing okay. It's not perfect. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that. I mean, Moscow's damn close to being perfect, but Russia is, it's got issues. Hell, they were in the 1990s. Russia was a destroyed economy, a destroyed society.
Right.
It's, Putin has been rebuilding them for 23 years successfully. But that thing that came out of this conflict is Russia has divorced itself from the West. They are done with the West. That doesn't mean that they'll never be friends with the West. They will. But Russia will never again allow the West to be in a position where Russia will be reliant upon them. Those days are over. This is a new Russia. This is a Russia that has said that Russia will never again be subordinated to the West culturally either. The day that the Russians go, oh, those French have better culture than us, is over. Russia's now said we are one of the major civilizations of the world, one of the major cultures of the world. This has been a paradigm shift in terms of Russia's approach to interacting world. This is the big thing. Defeating Ukraine was automatic. Russia was always going to defeat Ukraine. The timing of it and how that was going to happen, it could be flicks. The defeat of NATO was never intended. That's NATO's fault for jumping in. But the redefinition of Russia is the biggest story here, because Russia now will never back down. And there's a reason why the United States and Europe wanted to break Russia up at the end of the Soviet Union, because Russia is a huge landmass with a whole bunch of potential, a whole bunch of potential. And when you combine that landmass and that potential, you create a problem that the West can't contain. So we wanted to break it up. That's over now. Russia is united, Russia is whole, and they will emerge as, one of the top three powers. I mean, they are already, the top three powers, but they are going to be, I remember how, everybody talked about, Russia's just a gas station with a nuclear weapon.
Yeah. Blinken, Biden, they've all said it. Yep.
McCain. Well, Russia ain't a gas station. Russia is one of the most diverse, culturally diverse, one of the most intellectually advanced, and one of the most industrially advanced. And I'll leave it at this. All the revolutions that are taking place right now on the battlefield, to give you an example, Ukrainian airplanes started dropping out of the sky where they never dropped out of the sky before. And the Ukrainians are going, what the hell happened? Well, see, Russia sat there and watched and listened. And in less than a year was able to develop a weapon that could be fired and enter into the supposed safe zone without the Ukrainians detecting it and taking out their planes. Because Russia doesn't have a defense industry that's about gouging the taxpayer. The Russian defense industry receives inputs from the field, adapts and develops and then deploys and then perfects. And the Russian weapons today are all being fine-tuned to destroy Western weapons. Meanwhile, we're still putting out crap that breaks, crap that doesn't work. We haven't refined anything. Larry, do you think the U.S. Army has developed a drone doctrine that has FPV drones at the company level, maneuvering with no. And if you ain't doing that, you're going to lose a lot of guys, because that's the new face of war. And if you don't have your drone capability, you're going to lose too.
Yeah, no, they're starting to wake up to it, but I'm not even sure. I spent 23 years scripting terrorism exercises for JSOC, and so these involved terrorist scenarios in all corners of the world, everything from nuclear to chem bio and conventional terrorism. And we always had this process at the end, a hot wash, which was called lessons learned. And what I can say after all that time is nobody learned a damn thing. There were no lessons learned. There were needed and never learned. Now, I want to go back to something that Scott said, that just to put a exclamation mark on it. 43 years ago, when I was teaching at American University while trying to do a PhD, I took a group of students down to the Russian embassy. And we met, I think, with either the deputy chief of mission or the political secretary. At that time, the Soviets, when these guys were Russian, they were insecure, and they showed their insecurity by bragging and being would overstate things. And it was so evident that they doubted themselves. And that was the period when, blue jeans would be a big thing in Moscow. And the first McDonald's, I think, got opened in like 76, 77. Why that's important is I stayed 4 blocks from that McDonald's restaurant. It's no longer a McDonald's, gone. And the dealing with Russians, I dealt with someone from the foreign ministry, a very senior official. The confidence they have, the maturity they have, the calmness they have is really something that's it's enviable. You wish we had that in the United States. And I'm not kidding when I say that the United States is in the process of recreating itself into the Soviet Union, the old one, while Russia is in the process of making itself into sort of the powerhouse that the United States was in the 1950s, because they're excelling across the board. And I think the one temptation Russia will have to avoid is what has helped destroy America. That as long as you go outside and keep getting involved in foreign conflicts, keep butting your nose into the affairs of other countries, keep spending all of your taxpayer dollars on these foreign wars, you bankrupt your country in the process. And as Scott correctly noted, you go to Moscow and everything's up to date. It's beautiful. They don't have, like in San Francisco, you can get an app which shows you where all the human beings have defecated on the sidewalks. They don't have poop mats in Moscow. The streets are clean. It's big snow. People are out shoveling snow, and they got machines that work it and get it picked up. So, like Scott said, it's not a perfect place, but they've at least spent their money on making Russia great again. And that's, that it really has happened there. And what's so frustrating is in the United States, any politician, any political leader that tries to speak positively about Russia and why we should be friends with them is attacked, vilified, accused of being some sort of puppet of Putin. And what I'm afraid of is it's going to take us getting a bloody nose knocked on our ass before we may wake up and say, maybe we need to talk to the Russians.
Yeah. And it certainly is a new McCarthyism, so to speak, era here in the United States. And I wanted to get maybe your final comments before we move on to another topic on when I asked about the global ramifications of the Ukraine conflict. One of the things that's been going on is Zelensky's last presser, the one that you referenced, that you both referenced. He sounded quite down about NATO membership. But in recent weeks, there's been all of this hype on potential EU membership. And it almost sounds as if this concession of just talking about Ukraine's possible EU membership is just another reflection of the strategic defeat, this rot that is this project Ukraine. Maybe I'll let you and Scott first, and then Larry to comment on it.
Has everybody seen that movie Rudy?
Yeah,
it's very wonderful.
You all are more cultured than me.
Rudy.
And he's basically this small kid. I mean, he's got a lot of motivation, but he wants to play football for Notre Dame, and he walks on. And he spends every year he goes out there and he's on the practice squad and nothing. And they let him suit up in the end his senior year, but he's not going to play because he's not very good. He really doesn't qualify to do any of this stuff. But he gets in at the end. It's a happy ending. Ukraine is the story of Rudy with no happy ending. Yeah. Okay, the crowd can be shouting Rudy, 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 but what's really going on is they're getting Rudy's hopes up, and the coach just says, "No, don't send him in. Nothing. Sit on the bench. Not just sit on the bench, but get him the hell off the field. Get him in the locker room." Ukraine will never be a member of the European Union. It doesn't qualify. Nobody in Europe really wants it to be. This is one of these stupid political ploys that's put out there. And I don't know why the Ukrainians and the Georgians, because the Georgians have been given the same thing. You can be a member of the EU. No, you can't, Georgia. You don't qualify. The EU is an economic union, not just a political union, but an economic union, which means you got to sort of have a sound economy before you can be invited in. Ukraine isn't just a body on life support. It's dead. I mean, there ain't nothing there. You can put oxygen mask on it, put an IV in. You ain't going to recover that. The Ukraine only exists when we give it money. They don't have a viable economy right now. You heard Zelensky in his conference about, I need 6 working Ukrainians to pay taxes to pay for one soldier. So in the way, who's going to give me those jobs? Because they don't have any jobs in Ukraine. They got nothing in Ukraine. So Ukraine will never be a member of the EU. I don't know how to say that any clearer than this. This is one of those sick things that we did with Ukraine to lure them into believing that they could be a member of NATO. Now, no, I said they don't qualify to be NATO. They will never be a member of NATO ever. Well, I think everybody recognizes that now. So now they're putting out that last bit of hope. You can be a member of the EU. We'll fast track you into what? Fast track into what? Membership? No. This is the talks. We're fast tracking you into talks, which means we're going to drag it on. This is like watching a cat play with a mouse before it eats it. It's just sad, but it's Rudy with no happy ending.
Hey, remember that Turkey, the EU voted to let Turkey in too, the accession talks. That's about 21, 22 years ago. They're still waiting. It took Ireland. Think about this. Ireland, I mean, bunch of like to drink a bit, took them 20 years to get in. So, the notion that Ukraine's going to be bum rushed through the door, that's not happening. Yeah, but the other, I think Russia was surprised by the special military operation on several fronts. One, the weakening and potential destruction of NATO is one, but then it really gave the impetus for BRICS and the rise of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, creating an alternative economic system outside of the U.S. dollar denominated reserve system. And we're seeing, this week, the United States thinks it's being cute that, we're going to pass a law and we're going to take that $300 billion that we stole from Russia. We're going to give it to Ukraine. Boy, that'll be a game changer for them. Yeah, it might mean that, Zelensky can buy more cocaine. Okay. But apart from that it's the message it sends to the rest of the world is, if we do business in U.S. dollars, this United States can take our money anytime they want. And there's nothing we can do about it. So why would we want to get ourselves hooked into that kind of system when we can join BRICS and deal in our own currency? And so it's a fundamental change in the international economic order. The New World Order created in the wake of World War II with the International Monetary Fund, the Bretton Woods Agreement, the World Bank, the United Nations, all of that's coming apart. And the traditional U.S. leadership in that is crumbling. It's being dramatically eroded. And that's one of the things I think Russia awakened, it awoke to. It realized, as Scott said earlier, we don't need these guys. We're our own person. We can do our own thing. Now, if to that point, if we want to have a relationship with them, we'll do that. But, there's sort of like this spouse in an abusive relationship that's realized, hey, I can get away from the wife beater and I don't have to put up with that crap anymore.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I mean, the world has changed quite dramatically since February 2022, but even in the last year. Larry, you were just in Russia. I know, Scott, you've been. We're talking about economic growth in Russia despite these sanctions. I mean, the massive number of sanctions. 2023 seems to be the year where it has become very clear. If it wasn't clear in 2022, it is very clear in 2023 that
3.5%. 3.5% growth right now in Russia.
Growth. It's incredible.
I have a video. I have a video from a friend of mine who was at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum earlier this summer, and he was walking around. And he just sends this video, and he's showing all the pavilions and everything, and then he just turns and he goes, "Thank you, Joe Biden," because it's the greatest success out there. These sanctions have just backfired like you wouldn't believe. And what again? Larry knows this. Danny, you know this well. I ain't an economist, okay? I'm a very simple guy. I'm not, one of these gee whiz, McNamara's gee whiz guys that's good with numbers and all that stuff. But in December of 2021, I wrote an article that said, if they try to sanction Russia, it will backfire and be the end, because I know enough about gas stations to know that if you've got a big old, Humvee that chugs diesel, you need a gas station that sells diesel at an affordable price. And Europe was this big old Humvee that chugs diesel, and Russia supplied the diesel. And by sanctioning Russia, they cut off the diesel supply. And now the Humvee's out of fuel. It don't work. It's sitting in the corner, rusting, falling apart because there's no spare parts. A Marine can understand that. You don't have to be an economist to understand that. Europe shot itself in the foot with these sanctions. Russia, meanwhile, was liberated from the oligarchs. All the money the oligarchs were taking out of Russia now stays in Russia, reinvested in Russia. Every city I went to, and Larry, I think Moscow was the same. Was that way in May? You probably saw cranes on the skyline.
Yeah.
Building. They, it's a growth economy at a time when the West is still, I think the EU just passed their 14th round of sanctions or something like that. I mean, the first 13 were so good, they had to go to 14. It's ridiculous.
Well, again, the book that needs to be written it'll be a short book where economic sanctions worked. Yeah, I would challenge anybody to cite me a single example in history where a country imposed economics, in particular economic sanctions on another country, and it compelled that country to both either change its policies or change its political leadership or both.
Yeah.
Not a single. I mean, the United States keeps trying it over and over and over. And what happens? Cuba? Iran? Russia now.
Iraq
looks strong right now. Venezuela looks strong, and it's not a strong country normally, but it is. It doesn't look like it's changing. Syria too. Yeah.
So I was never asked to write this when I was at CIA, but somebody said, "Hey, give us an assessment. Can sanctions work?" And I said it would be a pretty brief, succinct paper. No, they don't. Don't do it. Find something else.
Well, sanctions is it's not a policy. It's the lack of policy.
Yeah.
When we impose sanctions, what we're saying is we don't know what to do, and so we're going to punt. We're going to put sanctions in place to buy time, to look like we're doing something while we do nothing. Meanwhile, all we do is end up isolating ourselves further. Our strength came from the fact that we dominated the global economic system. And the only way you continue to dominate is by having people buy into it, and then they buy into it. Now you can, and if you're smart, you manipulate on the sidelines. You don't do the big thing because you want them to continue to buy into it. You want them to keep coming. You want them to keep signing up, get more subscribers, but manipulate on the sideline, control indirectly. And if you're clever, you own the whole world. No, well, see, politically, we can't do that because we have to have Marco Rubio and, Ted Cruz and all these other idiots. We're strong. We're America. Like Tony Blinken. I know we might get to China, but, we can only deal with China from a position of strength. Really? How about just dealing with China? That would be nice. But the point is, we screwed up because we sanction everybody and they end up saying, well, we don't want to play anymore. What do you think is going to happen, Larry, when they take $300 billion from Russia? Because up until now, we've had Janet Yellen and others say, we can't do that because that's illegal.
And Russia's going to put, Russia will take back loans that U.S. companies were expected to be repaid. Russia will just confiscate.
They got $300 billion worth of infrastructure in there. They'll just nationalize.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's foolish.
And it also means that nobody's ever going to want the dollar again or the euro again.
Yeah.
Which is happening right now. That's what the whole impetus behind de-dollarization isn't that the dollar is a weak currency. Actually, the dollar on the international trade is a very strong currency. Look at it. When you trade in the dollar, you don't have any of this messy currency exchange rates and this complication. Things happen smoothly because everybody's using the same currency. How stupid were we to end that system? What we've done now, though, is make the dollar a suicide pill, because now, SWIFT, I can't do, I'm a sovereign nation. I want to do something, but I can't now because my dollars touch or a dollar I use touched the banking system. So now the U.S. government can come and tell me what to do. I mean, the arrogance of the Congress to say, if you touch a dollar, we own you. And then we say we want everybody to have their fiscal, their reserves in dollars and euros, again, because of the ease of commerce. And we put them in banks so that things are convenient, things are fast, the transaction, and then we seize them. And people are going to go, well, I know it's inconvenient for me to trade with renmin and rupees, but ain't nobody going to be seizing my money. America has basically navigated itself out of a winning position. We were controlling the world because we had a system in place that enabled us to control the world with very little effort. And we've thrown that away because of sanctions, this arrogance, etc. And the world will never go. BRICS was a Division III football team a couple years ago. They weren't very, it was like BRICS, the potential of BRICS. Maybe someday they'll grow up. Bam, instant adulthood. Not because BRICS suddenly, blossomed, because America became such a bad option that everybody went, got anything else out there? BRICS. And look, BRICS had to grow up quick. The South Africa summit they had, that was called rapid adulthood, where they had to come in. They talked about expanding. Russia's taking over BRICS on January 24th. They're going to expand and even expand more. They're off to the races now. Good job, America. Good job, Tony Blinken.
Well, one other thing on this, that America really is like poked one of its eyes out when it pushed Russia off SWIFT. Because why is that? Well, if you're transacting in dollars, any transaction in dollars going through SWIFT is going through the United States electronically, which means that NSA can pick that up and monitor every single transaction. So now what we've done is, we're not going to look any. We just poked our eyes out, so Russia can go do, if it was engaged with some skullduggery with its money, we're not going to see it now. And I mean, that's another self-inflicted wound. It just shows how stupid and short-sighted these people are. They just they want to do things
to build on what Larry just said. Tankers, old tankers. Russia's built this ghost fleet. I have to laugh about this because if you remember the arrogance, we're going to put a cap on Russian oil.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, they're doubling down on that supposedly. Yeah, that's
we're
going
to deny Russia insurance. Really? And you don't think Russia has a plan? So Russia went out and bought all the old tankers in the world, and they filled them up with oil. And now we don't know because they bought them not with dollars. They bought them on a market that we don't control anymore. We have no clue how many tankers Russia has and is operating. We have no idea what's going on. All these people that used to run the world oil thing and, I can predict the price. You can't. Because they don't know what Russia's doing. They have no clue what Russia's doing, because half of what Russia's doing right now is being reported in channels that the NSA isn't collecting on anymore, because we've allowed Russia to unplug from the known knowables. So we are, this is my frustration with people who are supposed to be experts in the energy security business. They haven't a clue about Russia. They don't know anything about Russia. They claim they don't need to know anything about Russia. They don't want to know. And this is why Russia's running circles around us, because Russia knows everything about us. Russia is very knowledgeable about who we are and what we are. That's why Russia's so patient. Do you see any panic from Russia? Larry, did you see any panic? No panic. There's nothing but panic in Washington, D.C. Nothing but panic. Why? Because they have no clue what's going on. They literally have no clue. All they'd have to do is pick up the phone and call the Russian ambassador, Anatoly Antonov, and talk. And he'd be more than happy to, but we don't allow anybody to engage with him. We've got nobody in State Department having connectivity with Moscow. I mean, Moscow used to have one of the biggest North American bureaus out there, in the foreign ministry. Whole bunch of experts on America who would pick up the phone and talk to their American counterparts when problems need to be solved. America hasn't made these phone calls, so they're redistributing these people. And Russia doesn't care. Russia's like, you don't want to talk to us? That's okay. Chinese want to talk to us. Indians want to talk to us. Africa wants to talk to us. The whole world wants to talk to us. Well, first of all, we should understand that the Biden administration's always had a difficult relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden was the vice president to Barack Obama. back when Obama was running for re-election and John McCain was his opponent. And if you remember that Netanyahu flew to the United States to address the United States Congress without the invitation of the White House, it was a politicized move to basically throw his weight behind John McCain in a presidential election, and that's an unforgivable sin in geopolitics. And so there's always been this rift between Biden and Netanyahu, and it's deeply personal, but it's also a policy rift because the Biden administration, even though they have a tendency to say something but not adequately back it up with action, they have been articulating from the moment they came into office in favor of a two-state solution, and they've been putting pressure on Israel, and they've been putting pressure on Israel because of their interest in two-state solution to stop the very aggressive settlement program on the West Bank. Netanyahu's just thumbed his nose at the United States and ignored him. And so there's a parallel policy unfolding to this concept of pursuing a two-state solution, which was the full implementation of the Abrams Accords. The Abrams Accords, of course, being that negotiated by the Trump administration. I think it was brought into play in 2020 before the election. The idea with the Abrams Accord is it gives lip service to a two-state solution, but the maps that they produced in support of it it's unsustainable politically. So nobody was seriously pursuing a two-state solution. What they were pursuing is normalization of relations between Israel and the Arab world, the Gulf Arab states in particular. And it's the Abrams Accords. So it's a series of agreements between Israel and Gulf Arabs. Israel normalized relations with Bahrain. They normalized relations with the United Arab Emirates, and they were in the process of sealing the deal with Saudi Arabia. And had they done that, and the Biden administration was aggressively pushing for this, it would have been the end of Palestinian statehood, because now nobody would be talking about Palestinian statehood. They'd be talking about a region transformed. Remember, Joe Biden at the G20 summit in India stood up and briefed as the cornerstone, the foundational policy initiative of his administration in this regard was the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, where you have container ships sailing out of Mumbai going to Dubai, getting on a train, going from the United Arab Emirates through Saudi Arabia into Jordan into Israel, and then getting on ships going to Greece and on into Europe. So this connectivity between Asia and Europe through the Middle East was Joe Biden's big thing. And that could only happen if Israel normalized relations. And notice what nobody was talking about there was a Palestinian state. It was Israel normalizing relations. So that's where, things stood. And so, even though there was this policy disagreement about Palestine between Biden and Netanyahu, Netanyahu briefed this same plan, this India Middle East Economic Corridor, when he spoke at the General Assembly at the United Nations in September. He was up there bragging about the role that Israel would play in this. This was the vision that everybody had. Nobody's talking about now. That's dead. That's dead. What everybody's talking about right now is a Palestinian state. But the Israelis, Netanyahu, first of all, understand that he is the head of the Likud party. Now, there's been a lot of controversy lately about, from the river to the sea. I guess we're not allowed to say that. I hope I don't get you banned on any of your platforms. But what people don't understand is that Hamas, which was an entity whose creation was facilitated by Benjamin Netanyahu himself in the 1980s and 1990s, didn't invent that. The Likud party did. That the 1977 charter of the Likud party basically is, from the river to the sea, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean will be Greater Israel. Actually, they take it up to, the Tigris and Euphrates, and they go to the Nile. I mean, they want it all. No Palestinians are supposed to be Eretz Israel, the Greater Israel, the biblical Israel. That's the Likud's position. And I think there it is. Between the sea and Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty right there. From the river to the sea, baby. Western Eretz Israel. Please, people need to understand what Eretz Israel is. It's biblical Israel. And the Likud party will never give it up. And that's where we're at right now. So while the Biden administration is talking about a two-state solution, hell, everybody in the world's talking about a two-state solution. There was an interesting interview done in England. I don't know if you saw it, where Sippy, and I can't pronounce her last name, but she's the ambassador of Israel to the United Kingdom. And she's asked about a two-state. She says there will be no two-state solution. Israel refuses to allow it. Israel will not allow it. And not only that, she's saying all the Palestinians got to go. They got to go. They're done. They're finished. So, that's where the Israelis are on this. So there's this big divide between the Biden administration and the Israelis, between the world and the Israelis. Israel is truly isolated right now, like they've never been before. And it's dangerous for them right now, because normally the pro-Israeli lobby has a lock on the American body politic, meaning that it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, only good things are going to happen for Israel from the Americans. That ain't happening now, because Israel has stopped being, something that politicians look to and say it promotes us, it helps us. Israel is hurting the United States. That Middle East, India Middle East economic corridor that was supposed to, Israel was supposed to like, it was supposed to help us compete against China's Belts and Roads Initiative. That was the whole purpose of it. Although I think you and I have talked about this before. The railroads in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, they're supposed to make this linkage. China built them, and China would be the ones building, and they did the ports and everything. So it just shows the stupidity of the Biden administration. But the point is, they actually believe that in order to be relevant in the world today, we have to be engaging in a positive fashion with the collective, with the global South, with the developing world, with the I guess you take the G7 out of the G20 with the G13. The non-G7 members have to be on our side. We lost them all, and it's hurting us right now. We are in a horrible position geopolitically on a global stage. And for the first time in modern times, Israel is seen as a detriment to America, that Israel is hurting America, which means that the Biden administration has got to divorce itself from Benjamin Netanyahu and his far right-wing coalition, governing coalition, which is even further to the right than the Likud party. These are fanatics. These are nuts. These are guys openly advocating genocide, the mass slaughter of Palestinians. So the Biden administration has basically said, you got to go. They got to go. And you can't keep doing what you're doing in Gaza. You got to stop dropping bombs on civilians and all this stuff. So they've given them, I think, till the end of the year to wrap up their military campaign. But here's the bad news for the Israelis. You could have 20 years to wrap up your military campaign, and you're still going to get your butts kicked, because you are getting your butts kicked right now. If you look at a couple things, the Battle of Iwo Jima, big Marine Corps battle. We stormed an island where the Japanese had dug a whole bunch of tunnels in the Mount Suribachi and underneath along the whole island. And so the Japanese were underground as the Marines are advancing above ground. And the Japanese would pop up here and there and pop, 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 kill Marines. And they killed a lot of Marines. I mean, we won that battle, but we lost a lot of Marines. It was a very bloody battle. Nothing easy about it. But that was smooth, flat desert. And the Japanese are still popping up and taking us. Now, let's take Stalingrad, where, if you look at the fight for Red October Factory, for instance, the Germans came in and they bombed it into rubble. And then the Red Army came in and dug into that rubble. And the Germans brought their best combat engineer troops to do the final assault, and they got slaughtered because the Red Army was just dug in. You couldn't dig them out. Look at Monte Cassino, the battles in the Italian Alps, where we leveled an ancient abbey, flattened the village, and the German paratroopers just dug in, and they withheld massive assaults by the Americans, by the Poles, by the New Zealanders, by the British, the Indians. Everybody tried to take it. They couldn't, because they're dug in. Now you combine the two. Combine a collapsed urban environment with tunnels underground, but not just a couple tunnels, 500 kilometers worth of tunnels. And so as the Israelis advance in, Hamas is just waiting for them, popping up, pap, 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 pap. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. Over 100 Israeli soldiers have been killed by Hamas so far. And that's not a huge number. I mean, it's a big number, but it's not a huge number. The number you have to pay attention to is the 5,000 wounded, because normally you're looking at wounded, a 1 to 3 ratio. So for every dead guy, there's 3 wounded. But here you got 100 dead guys, 5,000 wounded, over 2,000 of whom are permanently disabled. These are guys who have no legs, no arms, spinal injuries. Their brains been garbled. They're going to be pooping into a colostomy bag for the rest of their lives because their guts got ripped out. I mean, this is the reality of this fight. And the Israelis are scared to death. It's not being widely reported here in the West, but they are withdrawing from areas in Gaza because they can't hold it. The Hamas is just taking them down. They're not succeeding. They're scared. They got guys, they've had to relieve battalion commanders because the battalion commanders refused to advance, refused to fight. They had to fire them, kick 2 of them out of the military. The battalions themselves are saying, we don't want to do this. The best battalions, like the Golani Brigade, are just getting the snot kicked out. They just lost a battalion commander right now. He's dead. A lot of officers are dying. Heavy percentage of officers. Because why? Because the enlisted men, these reservists, these fat, stupid, lazy reservists who don't know how to fight, don't have the motivation. So what happens is the officers have to come forward and lead them aggressively. And when the officers lead them aggressively, bam, they die in high numbers. And then you got to replace them with what? The Israelis are getting slaughtered. They're getting butchered. They're not winning. And so when Biden says you have until the end of the year to wrap this up, the Israelis are like, we can't do this. This is why in the war cabinet for Netanyahu, he can't take anything to a vote. For instance, they just debated whether or not to have a ceasefire to begin the process of hostage release again, because that's a big political hot button in Israel right now. Netanyahu is against it. He doesn't want to do it. If he put it for a vote, he would lose because all the others are saying, "Nah, man, we're getting our butt." The military's going, "Boss, we ain't winning this. We ain't going to win this. We need to stop this because it's humiliating us." When the world becomes aware of that the IDF can't win this fight, the notion of our superiority and supremacy will be shattered forever. But Netanyahu does it. The thing about the hostages is interesting because it turned out, I think we've talked about this before, but we got in a lot of trouble, at least I did, because I was somebody who said, that what Hamas did on October 7th was a military raid, not an act of terrorism. It was a well-executed military raid. No, it was an act of terrorism, Scott. 1,200 innocent Israelis were slaughtered by Hamas. No. Fully a third of those were
Don't
soldiers.
tell Piers Morgan that.
I'll tell Piers Morgan head to his face. I'll say it straight up. So close I'll be spitting on him when I speak if he wants. But the point is, a third of them were military, which means that Hamas kicked the living snot out of the Israeli military that morning. But the rest of them, they weren't killed by Hamas. And the Israelis have finally admitted it. And I'm not talking about admitting it on the periphery, where you have a hostage, being released saying, "No, man, they fired in the building, they killed everybody." It was the Israelis who did that. Or Apache helicopters appeared and they just indiscriminately killed everything. The official Israeli government report is, yeah, we probably killed most of those people, but we don't want to investigate because it would be too harmful to the psychology of the Israeli nation at this time to know the truth. So we're shutting this thing down. We're not going to talk about it anymore. But I'm here to tell you right now, ladies and gentlemen, that all those party revelers, they weren't killed by Hamas. Some of them were, of course. I'm not pretending that Hamas didn't kill anybody. They did. But the majority of them died in a crossfire between Hamas and the Israeli police, where the Israeli police fired indiscriminately into the mob. They panicked. They brought in the helicopters, and the helicopters flattened everything. Hamas, the fight, they didn't discriminate. And when the Israeli army finally pushed into the kibbutzes, and you had hundreds of Israelis in their houses, held hostage by Hamas fighters who, for the most part, were prepared to exchange the hostages for their freedom, the tanks fired into the buildings and killed everybody. The Israeli army killed 80+% of the Israeli civilians who died on October 7th. And that's the God's honest truth, which again underscores the incompetence of the Israeli military, and the political problem that Netanyahu faces. They were releasing hostages. They had that 6-day pause, and hostages were being released, exchanged for prisoners, etc. And then they stopped. Since then, Israel has recovered the bodies of 2 hostages who appeared to have been killed by the Israelis. They launched a hostage rescue mission to get a 3rd guy. It failed. The hostage was killed by the Israelis in this, who lost a couple of their elite commandos in the process. And so now the hostage families are going to Netanyahu saying, wait a minute. Did you implement the Hannibal Doctrine against civilians? The Hannibal Doctrine, of course, being the notion that Israel will kill a soldier before they allow that soldier to be taken prisoner by a terrorist organization, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. Hannibal Doctrine. So it's pretty tough. So here, give you an example of real life stuff, guys. Hamas went in and they captured an Israeli intelligence facility. That was where the Israelis had their human intelligence capability, right there on the guy, because they never thought Hamas was coming over. So they kept it nestled right up there. And so all the servers that have all the names and the contact information and the history of reporting of all the human intelligence assets inside Gaza, and the case officers who run these guys are right there in that building. And Hamas captured it. And they took all the servers. That's why the next day, a whole bunch of Palestinian informers were dead, because Hamas went, oh, you've been spying for Israel? Pop, dead. The Israelis went blind, which is another reason why their military campaigns suffering, right? Because they don't have any intelligence. They lost everything. They lost the human intelligence. They lost the SIGINT, because the 8200 unit was likewise attacked. Their servers taken. But these guys captured some of the case officers, the guys, the spy runners, and they're moving them into Gaza. And the Israelis are going, kill them all. And so they were sending their helicopters and everything in to stop this guy, literally slaughtering Israeli civilians because it's indiscriminate. They said, kill everybody, because we can't let Hamas get their hands on these people. The Hannibal Doctrine. Israel lost control of the Gaza defense belt, and they lost control, custody of their own people. So the Israeli military was implementing the Hannibal Doctrine, full broad spectrum on everybody. They killed everybody because they couldn't allow Hamas to capture these people. All those Israeli soldiers, the females right now, you have the Israelis saying they're holding on to female hostages. Dude, they're prisoners of war. They're women who worked in the Combat Intelligence Corps. They primarily come from a battalion called Unit 414. These are the wall watchers. These are the girls that sat there at the computers and watched all the imagery. They had the remote control cannons that could fire. And sadly, they weren't issued any weapons. So that when Hamas broke through and came into their base, all these girls could do is run into a room. And there was a video. It's a very sad video, because you're watching this, and these are girls in their night clothes, in their underwear, and they're just sitting and they're scared to death because it's boom, 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 and Hamas is coming closer. And what happened is Hamas came in, threw in grenades, and killed about 80% of them. So all those beautiful young women who were there, they're dead, they're wounded. The survivors were captured, taken in. These girls know how Israel spied on Hamas. So Hamas is getting great intelligence from them. And so Israel's saying, you got to release them. And Hamas going, they ain't getting released. They're soldiers. These aren't, this isn't mom, pa, and the little kid that we took as a negotiating chip. These are soldiers, and you're going to pay a heavy price to get them back. And so you put all this together and you see the total untenable position that Benjamin Netanyahu's in. And now we add to it that Biden has told Netanyahu, not only will you stop doing what you're doing by the end of the year, but you got to go. And this is something that Biden has told Netanyahu. Your government at a minimum has got to go. We can't tolerate these people anymore, and you've got to go. Benjamin Netanyahu is operating on a 4% approval rating. And that number is going to get even lower now that the truth's come out about the Hannibal Doctrine and the fact that the vast majority of those civilians killed on October 7th were killed by the Israeli military. He's finished. He's done. And this is the reality. When the new year starts, we're going to be probably dealing with a new Israeli government that's going to have to accept the reality that Israel's isolation, that Netanyahu's foisted upon it by, this ridiculous campaign, this mass murder, this genocide, has become America's isolation, and America won't tolerate it anymore. And we're going to see the necessity of Israel to form a government capable of accepting the inevitability of a Palestinian state.
Yes. And Scott, I wanted to get your comment further on some developments that it appears the Defense Department, the State Department appear to be very concerned about, and maybe even quietly panicking about, which is the situation in the region as a whole. So you have the Red Sea, you have Yemen's armed forces led by the Houthis, essentially conducting regular captures, strikes. Norwegian vessels have been hit, French vessels. There have been many targets thus far, and some vessels have actually been captured. And then you also have a situation, I'll pull up the report, in Iraq. And the resistance, what's called the Islamic resistance in Syria and Iraq, have been quite active as well. So let me just pull this up. So here's a report from the Associated Press. Iraq scrambles to contain fighting between U.S. troops and Iran-backed groups. This is what they always say. They're Iran-backed groups fearing Gaza spillover. But essentially, it's the resistance in Iraq and Syria, which have committed dozens and dozens of attacks on U.S. installations, bases, etc. So this appears to be more and more of a concern for the United States side. What is your, I guess, assessment of this particular aspect of the conflict, the regional situation in particular, how Yemen, how these resistance forces in Iraq and in part Syria, and of course just broader regionally, how this has been playing out, and how does it affect the military situation in the conflict overall?
Well, let's start with Yemen and the Houthi. First of all, let's just make it clear that while Iran, I apologize if I've mispronounced that. I'm American, so it is what it is. I don't mean any insult by it. But the Iranians have been, they create something called the axis of resistance. And, it stretches from Lebanon, where Hezbollah is, through Syria, into Iraq with the pro-Iranian militias, Iran, and then down into Yemen with the Houthi. And Iran, provides, and I guess Hamas is thrown into that now too. And Iran provides financial resources and in some cases direct military assistance. With Yemen, there's no doubt that Iran has been providing Yemen with the resources necessary to take on Saudi Arabia in a war by proxy, ballistic missiles, drone capabilities, etc. But the Houthi do what the Houthi want to do. It ain't like the Houthi say, oh, big brother Iran's got to tell us what to do. The Houthi woke up and said, screw it, baby, we're going to war. We're fighting in defense of the Palestinians. And Iran's going, no, don't. We're trying to manage this escalation here. We don't want you. But the Houthi are the wild boys of the Middle East, and they're just like, yeehaw, go. And they start firing missiles, they firing stuff. And now they've done something that really hurts, is because this, I guess it's a Strait of Al Babel or I can't pronounce it, but the little narrow thing on the, where the Red Sea comes into the Gulf of Aden, there's a narrow little passageway where all the ships have to go through, and they're in the range of everything the Yemenis have. And the Yemenis have said, as long as Israel's doing what they're doing in Gaza, no shipping will be allowed to go through if it's heading to Israel. And they're sink. I don't think they think they've sunk stuff, but they've hit stuff, put it on fire, they've captured stuff. And so now what's happening is that, ships are very expensive, and the owners don't like their ships to catch on fire or be captured. And so they're diverting all the way around Africa, coming in the other way to get to Israel. And that's very, very expensive. It's costing Israel tens of billions of dollars of denied economic activity. And so the Houthi are actually very sophisticated here. This is a very sophisticated weapon that they've dealt the Israelis. And the United States is going, damn it, now we got to respond here. But if we respond there, we got to take those forces and move them here. And remember, we've already said we don't have any money for this. All those aircraft carriers that we deployed to scare Hezbollah, it's basically eating up the Navy's operational budget, meaning money that was supposed to be set aside for training and other things is now being spent on these operations, which means there's no training taking place. There's other things that aren't happening. And now you want to expand naval operations into this area. Where's the money coming from? This is why the U.S. Navy is calling up the Australians and saying, hey, get some of your ships up here right now. We need you to take care of the security. And the Australians are going, no, we're not going to do that. This is a problem for the United States because we don't have the force structure to do everything at once. And so the Houthi have dealt a huge blow, not only to Israel, but to the United States. And the only way that we could rectify this is to go to war against them. But the Saudis have been using American-provided aircraft and American intelligence since 2014, and they haven't beat the Houthi yet. And then again, who's going to pay for this? Where's the money coming from? We're going to have another war in Yemen, a forever war. And none of these wars have gone well for us. And if we go to war against the Houthi, the whole region's going to blow up. The axis of resistance will just go haywire. These militias that are firing against American forces in Iraq and in Syria, believe it or not, are holding back. They could do a lot more. They're simply reminding the Americans that they're here and that there will be price to be paid so long as this conflict goes on, that nothing is free. And what has the United States done? We've responded very minimally. We've bombed a couple warehouses associated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command, but we've bombed those warehouses before in I guess Abu Kamal across the river from Al-Qaim. We've been hitting that place, the same place over and over again. It's like the Iranians go, okay, rebuild the warehouse so America can bomb it next week, kind of thing. We're not doing real harm on the Iranians because we don't want to. If we do real harm on the Iranians, then they get involved. And now we're talking about an expansive conflict, and we only got 2,000 guys in that region. That ain't a lot of guys. And if the whole region blows up, those 2,000 guys can be swamped. They can be overrun. And now we have to divert all our air power into that area. Again, who's going to pay for it? We don't have a budget for this. And now we're doing that. And this war gets out of control, spins out of control. This is a nightmare scenario for the Biden administration. And if it blows up enough, because another area that everybody's worried about is what's going to happen with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has done a masterful job of escalation management. They have been, I mean, it's like the Israelis, are sitting there in this boxing match with Hamas, and Hamas split the eye, and Israel's bleeding here, and Hezbollah is just sitting there once in a while going, "Let me rub some salt in that wound for you." And come on, get out of here, boom, boom, pow. And they get salt in that wound. Stop it. Hezbollah is just sitting there pissing them off because they're really, really putting, and it's hurting them. Remember how sophisticated I said the Houthi were? Understand that most of what Hezbollah is doing against Israel is economic in nature. Yes, they're taking down Israeli troops. They're destroying a lot of Israeli tanks, a lot of Israeli infrastructure. But what they're really doing is terrorizing the north so much that 70,000 Israelis had to be withdrawn from the northern settlements and resettled in temporary accommodations. That ain't free. That ain't free. It's costing Israel billions of dollars. And that 70,000 who, they had jobs up there, which means they're working, they're producing, there's taxes, the economy kind of stuff. They're here now. They ain't working. They ain't producing. They're just sucking up resources. It's a huge, huge, giant, gutting of the Israeli economy. The same thing out of what